Uh, yeah, Dan. Yeah, that's interesting because I think organizations have a tendency to ignore this ending phase. I mean, organizations revolve. I mean, their purpose is to create, right? Not to disband, not to kind of end.
Self
And
perpetuating, right?
yeah, self-perpetuating, and I think it's important for organizations for a thriving organization to be able to continue to move forward. I think it's important for them to know when to let things go. And I actually think that's one of the reasons that Cruft is developed. I've worked for very large organizations, and at some point in time, they become so big that they can't actually produce anything anymore. They end up having to purchase companies that produce stuff, and then they kind of become like these holding companies. And there's lots of companies that are in that state. And I think one of the reasons is because they don't know how to actually close things. They don't know how to end things, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which we don't need us to go into. But they definitely
Well, I
close.
think we've talked about them actually. I mean, I think that terror management theory we've already said that sense of grief and loss can contribute to that resistance to ending something that should be ended.
Yeah, but I think there's also business, fiduciary, fiscal reasons why things don't close
Yeah.
out
Oh
as
yeah.
well. There's legal reasons why things don't end. There's a bunch of reasons, right?
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
That
For
things just
sure.
will continue on. But with that said, like you said, I mean, there things can close out, and like death in the family, you can have this kind of very similar relationship to the something ending that you've invested your time, your energy, your blood, your sweat, from a company's perspective, your dollars. It's tough to let go. You put so much into it, and you can have those same, and under certain circumstances, those same exact sorts of feelings, those denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance process. And I think most of us probably kind of get through part of that, and then just kind of the acceptance part, I think oftentimes is the hardest, and most people actually don't get through that in an organization. I think people just kind of live with it.
Yeah, and they quit or they
Yeah, you're
sit around
despondent.
bitter. They quiet quit.
Yeah,
And
exactly, right? And so you there is a weird parallel to life and death with the organization. And it's important that eventually you can get past that, and you accept that, and you just kind of are able to move forward. But how do
mhm.
you do that? Right? I mean, how do you do that? And as we mentioned, organizations do have their own life expectancies. Projects do have their own life expectancies. One thing I'd like to bring up real quick is that this whole life expectancy thing, or death, unlike humans where we don't really have zombies, there are zombie projects that probably should be considered dead, right, but are still continue. I don't know. I mean, in my experience, I've
I would
experienced
say
that.
there's zombie organizations out there, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think you see it in COVID, right? I think of not just on a programmatic level, but like department stores and Sears and J.C. Penney's that were kind of limping to their end, and COVID just changed the conditions of the environment to speed up their demise. Um, and I see it in higher. I feel like as someone who works in higher education, we're constantly wrestling with how to shut programs down because I feel like we're always in a cycle of death and rebirth in higher education. Like we're cutting programs, we're creating new ones, we're responding to the environment because a lot of sometimes it has nothing to do with the people involved that causes a program or project or institution to become a zombie. It has to do with the environment's just changed and they haven't been able to adapt or whatever they haven't been able to adapt to the changing environment and it's no longer sustainable.
Yeah, like there's a momentum behind it. That momentum is what's keeping it going, but it doesn't align. And a writer for Project Manager websites, her name Jennifer Bridges. She has some. I'll list off what she wrote here. She has some stuff that she says are sort of indicators or signs of zombie projects, right? Ones that should probably
Ooh,
they're done.
this is
Uh,
perfect for Halloween.
yeah. Yes, exactly. So one is when it no longer meets the project needs, such as or the original purpose, or the project has changed and it can't be met, right? So it's kind of doing its thing, but it's not actually producing what it was supposed to be doing anymore. But yet again, it's employing people kind of going through the ritual of continuing going. The costs are out of control, right? And
Oh
there's no
yeah.
way to recoup the return on the investment, right? And no need for that project to continue to go on. The cost to compete or the cost to complete exceeds the budget and is impossible to cover the difference in the cost. So again, there's a cost constituency there. The circumstances affect the possibility of completion, such as those listed above. There are ethical and or legal issues. I think you're kind of bringing that up. And then I added one to the list when the project no longer aligns with the business goals, which I think is exactly what you were just talking about. When there's the organization has moved a different direction or has made changes, and that project just doesn't map to or align with that anymore. And again, that could go on forever, and that becomes waste. And you got to recognize that sooner rather than
Well,
later.
I would say, I mean, and also the environment and the culture has changed around, again, I come from a higher ed background, so I'm thinking of educational programs and how the needs change and how, in a open system environment like a college or university is like, new laws can change the need for a program. Like, so for instance, I'm thinking early childhood education in Seattle. That's a booming program, but that's because laws were passed that required people to get a degree
Yeah,
in that in order to be
yeah,
able to do that. And so that's a very clear legal thing that says, okay, you got to do this to get your credential to work. Um, Whereas I'm thinking of, I'm fortunate I have to go back to the arts and humanities, right? Culturally, that is not as appealing and incentivized in the political arena and the economic arena as much. So you see those programs really withering on the vine, as it were, which is sad because they are important programs.
yeah, yeah. And it's tough. And like I said, I just listed off some reasons why zombie projects should close out. The signals to get that are not always easy. You can kind of internalize it, but some signals to look for a zombie project would be the leadership begins to not show up for critical meetings, right? If it means it's not really important for them anymore. Resources begin to dwindle or are not easily replaced. You're not able to kind of collect the resources, whether that's money or people or things like that. And peer collaboration becomes increasingly difficult, right? Meaning that it's just
But
not
how
on.
much of that is the leadership and the people involved
It's not
versus
it's not saying that that's it's as those are signals. That's not saying that those are it's correlation necessarily it's causation. It's a signal to say it's the fact that that's what's happening.
right? So
There's a
it's something to look for
look
because
for.
maybe those people involved in the program see the writing on the wall and are, as they say now, quiet kidding,
Yeah,
quitting,
and there
as
could
the
be
kids say, quiet quitting.
those three signals could be indicative of something else too, not of that. I'm
Yeah,
just saying those are just something to think about if you're looking at it. And to your point, all those three signals might mean to you is that you have to work a little harder to make sure that project succeeds. So it doesn't mean quit necessarily. That's just those are three signals that potentially you have a zombie project. So you've got your zombie's dead. You realize it's a dead project. It's over. Whether because it's successful, it finished, and you don't need to do it anymore, or it's not doing anything. It's not doing what it needed to do, right? And you put it out to pasture. So, like the human world, when people pass away, there's this process of having to sort of pull things together and getting on with your life, and you end up having to sort of manage this person, the dead person's assets, and stuff like that. And so it's very similar with a project. So projects are, I mean, and so when you have a project and when you've deemed it to be finished or closed out or dead, then there are several stages that you have to think about. There's several things, and I'll rattle those off. And I got this list from the Asana website. I liked it. It kind of aligned with the sort of the list I was thinking about. So I just took it from there. And Asana is a project management application. And I want to be clear, they have not reached out to us for anything. I just discovered this on my own.
oh,
So
that's what he says. He's pocketing the money and
yeah.
not sharing it with me.
Sorry, Dan.
Thanks,
Uh,
Jonah.
so there's 8. So basically, perform a final test, wrap up loose ends, complete administrative tasks, notify team about next steps, update stakeholders and send a final report, hold a project postmortem, and create a roadmap for improvements and celebrate. So I'm going to run through these, Dan, briefly, but I'm going to kind of stick on the ones that think that are most important for me, and then you maybe.
Yeah, there's a couple on there that list that I want to speak to as well.
Okay, so what do you think about perform final? So let me qualify perform final test. Perform final test is sort of like you're checking to see like if you're ending it, has it done what it's supposed to do? Right. And so it goes back to this is kind of like that checking if it's a zombie thing, right? Can you satisfactorily say it has solved or done what it's supposed to do? Has it captured the state of the project? So it's just kind of doing that final litmus test of what its state is, right? So
Yeah. So I could think of, for instance, now I'm sure a lot of organizations are shutting down their COVID response programs in their organizations because the environment's changed and that project no longer needs to continue, right? Laws are changing and restrictions are being lightened up, so there's no longer a need to have those conversations as much. So
yeah.
you're starting to see that wind down. So that's
Yeah.
a very clear, the signal's there, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't need to
Yeah.
continue.
And we can argue as we don't want it to be dismissive. That's kind of a critical one in some regards because that's the one that gets missed, and then you end up having that project that goes on forever, or you're not wrapping up correctly, or you're not starting this sort of closure process. So it's important to start that one off. But the next one is wrap up loose ends, and that is sort of typified by: are there any outstanding efforts that need to be dealt with? There could be sort of things like a class is in progress. You're closing the project, but the class has got to end through the semester, or there's
We
a
call it
project.
teaching out.
Is it called teaching out? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
if you shut down a academic program and you still have students in the program, you want to try and set it up so you can teach them out so that they can complete. So
Yeah, so that's step two. Make sure that you've got that and you figured out how you're going to handle that. The third one is complete administrative tasks. That's the one that really aligns a lot with the death of a family, right? I mean, this is the one where you're going to move assets. You're going to check out, how are you going to sell the home,
cancel credit cards.
cancel credit cards, things like that, right? And that's a very similar thing
Make sure you write yourself into the will.
You do. You got to find a nefarious lawyer and make sure all assets go to you. Um,
Exactly.
so you want to make sure the project files and assets, whatever are distributed correctly. Updates to documentation. Make sure project documents are signed. Close out contracts. Things like that. Right. It's a completely not fun part. Everybody wants to ignore it, especially because you just want to move on to the next project, and this just feels like actually this dead project won't be finished.
Yeah, no, imagine it takes a lot of effort to get that stuff done because it's the boring, unglamorous, thankless crap that you gotta clear off the desk so you can start the next thing.
Exactly. And this is the point where you actually make sure your team members are assigned to new projects. You don't do that, then they're going to be like, what do we do? We're on this, where are we supposed to go? And you might not have, team members that kind of are proactive, and they're going to just actually be resentful that this project's closed and they have no idea what to do next. And again, you're going to lose somebody probably if you don't take care of
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah.
So that's any other, that's the complete administrative tasks. I'm sure you've
No, I have nothing else to say about that. I mean, my programs don't close.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're an epitome of pure success, nonstop. That's right. No, we've discussed this. Dan is perfect, everybody. And then
That's right. That's right.
number
No,
four,
not at all.
notify.
Talk to my wife.
Oh, yeah, it's perfection. Perfection from non-perfection is what she would say. But notify teams about next steps. That's stage 4. So basically,
Yeah, communication's always important.
Exactly. You want to
That's I think with communication, that's where all the gossip and the conspiracy theories and the misunderstandings get perpetuated. Because if you do not communicate, and we'll say this again and again during this podcast series, if you do not communicate, people will fill the void with their own stories,
That's right.
and that can cause all kinds of mayhem in your organization. Because
right.
nothing spreads faster than a rumor.
That's right. That can generate a culture that you don't want to have created. So, yeah, for sure. 5 is update stakeholders and send final reports, and that's not unlike step 3 to some degree. But basically, this is letting your leadership know about the closure, what they can expect, what they can anticipate, what potentially your game plan might be.
Document.
Yep. And feedback from them. You want to get information from them. This is a stakeholder conversation. 6 is hold a project post-mortem meeting. And maybe I'm assuming this is the one that you're interested in. This is what I'm interested in. I have a feeling this one gets short shrift. What do you think? Typically,
Oh, it always gets shifted, right, or
yeah.
shrifted, or whatever that word is.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think I always kind of approach things from a metacognitive learning perspective, and in the metacognitive learning cycle, evaluation is the key, right? It's the end of the learning process, and to me, this is about organizational learning. In our last episode, we talked about sense making organizations, but a sense making organization is also kind of a learning organization, and if you're not setting up systems to learn from what you've done well and what you've not done so well at, you're not going to be able to grow and adapt as an organization. So yeah, I think that taking the time to do the evaluation and post-mortem is key.
agreed, agreed. And you said everything I would have said, so we will leave it at that. But yeah, so don't not do the post mortem. Always be looking back to see where you're going to go forward to some degree. So 7 is create a roadmap for improvements. It's not unlike, it's basically after you've done your post mortem, now you know where to go. You've got your information. And so you're going to leverage that data to move forward. And so that's 7, is to kind of figure out what's the next thing you're going to do. And again, this goes back to communication to your employees and the leadership and your stakeholders. They're going to want to know this. And this is something, obviously this can change, but that's what this phase is for. And that's phase 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then phase 8 is celebrate. Yes, celebrate.
Yeah, probably another one that is shortchanged.
Yeah. Agreed.
Because usually, especially if it's felt like the project was a failure or didn't go somewhere, then you don't want to celebrate. You want to kind of have, but you should have a wake for it. And I think, you can reframe that again, going back to that metacognitive evaluation and thinking about what went right and what went wrong and what you can learn from, and where are there opportunities based on what you've learned. You can turn that into a celebration. Like it's like I used to tell my kid when he was growing up. It's like the only definition of failure is not learning from what your experience has been, right? You can fail at all, in your mind, fail at all kinds of different things. But if you've taken some wisdom from what happened and learned from it and can make changes based on it, then it actually wasn't a failure. It was just a learning experience.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that was one of the notes I put there. As long as you've collected data, as long as you are able to look at that data, there's no such thing as failure. You're, like you said, it's just data information, and you're moving forward. If you're not collecting data, then that was your failure. Was not collecting the data. That's where you failed.
So, and that's something to learn from too.
That's something to
collect that data.
Collect that data.
As we said in another episode again, always be collecting data.
Always be collecting data. So yeah, and I think the celebration thing is about bonding, about relationships. It's a place where the team can commiserate or celebrate. All that's super, because that's the part where you get to be human. And let's be honest, Dan, you don't really know somebody truly until you see them drunk out of their mind, and then you know them in the deepest way possible. So
I guess I don't know you then, Jonah.
Oh,
no, I know him too well.
You do some drinking, I think. Then know
him too well.
Yes, always celebrate. Take any chance you can to celebrate. Life is short. Terror theory.
Yeah. Hey man, terror management theory keeps me drinking.